and welcome to the June 2023 edition of KRAD Readings. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, aka KRAD, and here I am again in the middle of the month, providing you with your monthly reading of one of my works of short fiction. This time I'm going back to do another story in the Dragon Precinct universe, which debuted way back in 2004 with the novel Dragon Precinct, which was published by Simon & Schuster as part of a science fiction imprint that was shortly thereafter discontinued. I'm fairly certain it's not because of me. But the series was left kind of orphaned after that, so I started doing short stories in the universe to keep it going. And then in 2011, it was picked up by a small press, Dark Quest Books, which also, we got the rights back to Dragon Precinct, and they reprinted that, published the second book, Unicorn Precinct, as well as Goblin Precinct, Gryphon Precinct, and a short story collection, Tales from Dragon Precinct. And then Dark Quest Books kind of fell into the swamp. The series was picked up by eSpec Books, who reprinted all the previous books in the series, and published the next book in the series, Mermaid Precinct. And one of the things I did with Mermaid, because I was starting fresh with a new publisher, and also it had been a few years, 6 years? Gryphon Precinct came out in 2013, and 2019 was when Mermaid Precinct was. So it's been 6 years. I had a new publisher, and for that and other reasons, I decided to have Mermaid Precinct jump the timeline by a year, so that after all the status quo changes that happened in Gryphon Precinct, we then fast-forwarded 1 year. And one of the things I mentioned in Mermaid Precinct as one of the things that happened in that 1 year interregnum between books was the Gorvangin Rampages. I just mentioned that in passing, and I figured, hey, let's make a story out of it, because as I said, and as you've seen if you've subscribed to this channel, I have written a lot of stories in the Precinct universe, which, for those of you who don't know, is a melding of epic fantasy and police procedure. I usually pitch it as Law and Order meets Lord of the Rings. And I decided, as I have done with several other Precinct stories, including The Fall of Yaren and Gan Brightblade versus Mythos the Mighty, as well as the first and second cases of Torn and Danthras, the two main characters that they had when they first became partners, When the Magic Goes Away and Baker's Dozen. All of those I did as crowdfunds initially. And I did the same thing with the Gorvangin Rampages. In 2019, I did that, and also the Cassie Zukov story, Ragnarok in a Hard Place. I did those jointly as crowdfund stories, and which worked out nicely. Those haven't been printed yet, although they should be soon. As I've mentioned in previous installments, Ragnarok in a Hard Place will be printed in the Cassie Zukov collection of the same name. The Gorvangin Rampages will be appearing in more Tales from Dragon Precinct. I am not sure when that's going to be published. That's a conversation I have to have with my publisher. But that'll be a second collection of stories in the Precinct universe. Meanwhile, if you didn't support the crowdfund, you haven't read the story, because those are the only people who've seen it until now. So, without further ado, here is The Gorvangin Rampages, a Dragon Precinct story by Keith R.A. DeCandido. 1. The guilds of Cliff's End are a sham. Alessandro paused and let those words sink in. Given that he said them to the assembled leaders of the guilds of Cliff's End, they were, to say the least, provocative. A susurrus of annoyance and grumbling circulated around the Wyvern's Roost Tavern's back room. He was one of those leaders himself, of course. Shortly after the death of Lord Albin, the previous head of the Blacksmiths Guild, Kalo Zero, had retired and moved to Barlin. Alessandro had been elected to take his place by his fellow blacksmiths. They will remain so, he continued, as long as that word remains in the plural. Sham is singular, said Sharpak, the head of the Masonry Guild, which caused the sounds of annoyance to modulate into chuckles. Smiling, Alessandro said, I meant guilds, of course. We are divided, we are contentious, and we are fractious. There is a reason why one of the most successful battle strategies that has ever been invented is divide and conquer. The nobility of this city-state allowed us to form guilds, yes, but they have kept us separate. They've kept us divided, and they have, as a result, conquered us. Says you, old son. Quinlan, the head of the Lumber Guild, had his large arms folded over his barrel chest. We're doing just fine, thank you. That's all well and good for you, Charpak said. You've always got trees out in the forest of Nimvale, haven't you? Always lumber around, am I right? Takes talent to gather and hew the lumber, it does, Quinlan said angrily. Delheim, the head of the Coopers Guild, said, Well, the hewing's mostly us and the Carpenters Guild, ain't it? And there, Alessandro said, is a perfect example. Tell me, Delheim, those of you who make barrels, you are carpenters, are you not? The head of the Carpenters Guild, Embar, said, Nah, they're carpenters who stopped after learning the easy stuff. We're specialists, Delheim said with a sneer. Yet your rates are different for similar work, Alessandro said, and the Carpenters Guild has significantly better benefits for its members than the Coopers Guild does, because Embar's predecessor, Mirren Shell, negotiated more successfully. Embar shrugged. We look after our own. Spreading his arms wide, Alessandro said, Which is why we stand alone. Wait a sec, Delheim said with a frown. What benefits? For starters, Alessandro said, members of the Carpenters Guild who are injured while working get paid while they recover from that injury. Delheim whirled on Embar. Since when? Again, Embar shrugged. Dr. Marinchel. She agreed to it and got the nobility to sign off on it. He turned to Alessandro. Mind telling me how you found out? That's supposed to be privileged information. And why is that? Alessandro asked urgently. Why should that be privileged? Why should the Coopers not get the same consideration when they're injured? Why should the other guilds also not get that? Suzette, the recently appointed head of the Prostitutes Guild, said in a gentle voice, Some do, assuming the injury or illness relates to work. What? Charpak said. So if some whore gets the clap, she still gets paid? Yes. We have a fund for all guild members for precisely such an occasion. Pointing at Suzette, Alessandro said, And that, my friends, is what we all should have. If one guild negotiates a benefit, all the guilds should have access to that benefit. If one guild thinks of a way to help their members, it should be considered help to help all the guilds. We are workers. We support this city-state. Without us, all commerce would grind to an absolute halt. Yet we are unappreciated, taken for granted. And by insisting that we only look after ourselves instead of helping each other, that attitude festers and continues to take root. He smiled. For that matter, we should have our own fund, for all the guilds to use to help each other. The head of the Tavern Guild, Jessica, held up a hand. Impressed that at least one guild head was polite, Alessandro nodded at her. Yes, Jessica? There's only one little problem. Alessandro had wondered who was going to be bright enough to bring this up. The current law. Charpak frowned. What current law? Jessica replied, The law that states that a guild may only apply to a single trade. Kind of a problem then, isn't it? Quinlan unfolded his arms and threw them up. Why are we even wasting our time with this? Good question, Delheim said. Because, Alessandro said before anyone else could object, I've actually read the law. Nowhere does it state what the definition of a trade is. I would argue that worker can qualify as a trade. That's pretty weak, you ask me, Quinlan said. I agree, said Jessica. But I also know that the nobility love to screw us with technicalities. Be nice to turn that back on them. So let me get this straight, Charpak said. Your plan is to... what exactly? Folding his hands in front of himself, Alessandro said, We have a meeting tomorrow with Lord Doval to talk about the new tariffs. Yeah, that's a briefing, not a meeting, said Boyce, the head of the Gardeners Guild. He's just going to tell us about all the new tariffs. And when he's done with that, Alessandro said, we will tell him that we wish to consider all workers in Cliff's End to be tradespeople, and that the guilds wish to unite. Uh-huh. Embar was shaking his head. And what do we do after he laughs in our face? Then we show him the error of his ways. Lord Duval took a deep breath after finishing his explanation of the new tariff structure that he and his mother, Lady Mirka, had developed. Apparently, Mother had been urging Duval's late father, Lord Albin, to restructure the tariffs for ages, but Father had put her off, saying it would be too disruptive. However, Father's death had been fairly disruptive in its own right, and that was as nothing compared to its immediate aftermath. When Duval's older brother Blake had taken over running the city-state, he practically overhauled the whole place. Said overhaul came to a grinding halt when it was revealed that Blake had conspired to have Father killed, and also attempted to have the king and queen assassinated as well. After his arrest, Duval was named Lord of the Domain. Since Cliff's End was pretty well disrupted anyhow, Duval saw no sense in putting Mother off the way Father had. He looked out over the faces of the guild leaders, gathered in the meeting room in the western wing of the castle. Many had glazed expressions, looking desperate to be almost anywhere else. Duval supposed that was to be expected for a portion of them. He was glad to see that at least some seemed genuinely engaged by the presentation, notably the leaders of the tavern, coopers, gardeners, prostitutes, and blacksmiths guilds. The latter in particular seemed keen and looked as if he were about to speak. However, the presentation had already taken too long, so Duval said, "My apologies, but I'm afraid I'm already late for my next appointment, so I must cut this short. If you have any questions, you may direct them to Lady Mirka, as she will be handling the execution of these policies. I'm sure you can make arrangements through her secretary to speak to her." The Blacksmiths Guild's leader, who was new and Duval simply could not recall his name, said, "I'm afraid, my lord, that it is not the tariffs about which I wish to speak." "Oh, then it will have to wait. This cannot wait. It could be months before we're all in the same room, and we wish to discuss with you our desire to unite the various guilds into a single unit, a workers' guild, as it were." Duval stared at the man, Alessandro, he suddenly recalled, with confusion and disbelief. "Well, that would be absurd. Worker isn't a trade. One could argue that it is all the trades combined, and combining our guilds is what we all desire." Making a clicking sound with his tongue and teeth, Duval shook his head. No, I'm afraid that won't do. It makes little sense on the face of it. The working needs of your average prostitute hardly match those of your average gardener, do they?" The leader of the Prostitutes Guild gave an enigmatic smile. "On the contrary, my lord, both are skilled in cultivation." Duval opened his mouth and then closed it. He didn't have time for a semantic argument. "I'm sorry, but I'm afraid it won't be possible. Now, if you'll excuse me." He moved toward the door to the meeting room. Alessandro said, "You should not dismiss us so cavalierly, my lord." Stopping, Duval turned to face the guild leader. "I am lord of this domain, sir, and I will dismiss you in any manner I please." With that, he departed. He really didn't wish to keep Madame Brigit waiting any longer. 3. Cradell was really looking forward to a pastry this morning. He had had a very long, very pleasant night performing songs at the new Albin Memorial Amphitheater. The gnome had duetted with an elf who had a superlative singing voice. Her soprano harmonies matched his tenor melodies perfectly. They made an odd pairing on the stage as she towered over him, but they made it work. Indeed, it defied expectations, as Cradell's own voice was quite powerful, while hers was more genteel. It was also the last performance of the set, as his erstwhile duetting partner was this morning headed to Yaren for a series of concerts there. For his part, Cradell had a few days off. Since he wasn't performing, he could indulge himself with some of the magnificent pastries from the corner eatery. However, the bakers and serving staff were all standing outside the eatery, arms linked, chanting, "Kobarnag Gorvangin!" "What's going on?" The owner of the corner eatery, a short human woman, said, "We ain't working today. Want to know why? Talk to his bloody lordship." Then she went back to chanting, "Kobarnag Gorvangin!" with the others. Cradell frowned, wondering what was going on. But if the corner eatery didn't want his copper pieces in exchange for pastries, he could always go elsewhere. There were bakeries all over Cliff's End. Except at every single one he went to, he encountered the same tableau. The employees of the bakery standing outside the front door, arms linked, chanting, "Kobarnag Gorvangin!" Soralia's feet were absolutely killing her. It had been a very long night, serving drinks at the Dancing Seagull, as it had been every night since construction had started on the extension of the port. As a resident of Cliff's End, Soralia had been extremely grateful for the extension, as the docks had gotten overcrowded of late. As a bartender at the Dancing Seagull, she wished there weren't quite so many workers who wanted to unwind alongside the sailors. It wouldn't have been so bad, except the construction workers, unlike the sailors, were terrible tippers. However, having finished her long shift behind the bar, she was now headed to Sandy Brook Way. She had a regular appointment with Hotark, her favorite among the prostitutes at Suzette's. Hotark was always able to massage her feet, making them feel better, quickly followed by a skillful massaging of other parts of her. It was the only way she could wind down after a long shift. Paying for a prostitute was a huge expense, but it was the only thing that made it possible for her to relax enough to sleep during the day after her shift. To her chagrin, she turned onto Sandy Brook Way to find all the brothels had the various employees, both those who worked in the bedrooms and those who did maintenance and paperwork, all standing out in front of the entrances, arms linked, chanting, "Kobarne Gorvangin!" "What's going on?" Soralia asked no one in particular. "Hell if I know," said a dwarf who was standing in the middle of the way, hands on hips. "I got me an appointment with Sifredia, and they're telling me they ain't working today." "Who ain't working today?" Soralia asked. "All of them!" The dwarf indicated the chanting workers with one flailing arm gesture. Soralia shook her head. "What is that they're saying? Sounds like everyone together?" "Close. You speak Daili?" the dwarf asked, referring to the language of his people. "A little bit." "Well, it actually means one union together." "And they just keep chanting it?" "Yes." "Why?" "Zimph only knows." Gonzal was starting to get concerned. The young officer in the Cliff's End Castle Guard was bringing his personal dagger to Milano's for a proper sharpening. Gonzal had a sharpening stone of his own, of course, but every time he tried to use it, neither his sword nor his dagger ever got as sharp as he wanted. He'd almost ruined his last dagger completely. But Milano always did it right, made it nice and sharp and shiny. Gonzal had been carrying the dagger all along, much to the chagrin of Sergeant Manet, but even the sergeant had eventually relented. Mermaid Precinct had gotten insane of late, what with all the work on the port extension, and sometimes a guard needed just a little bit of extra protection. Today, in particular, the whole city-state seemed on edge. He kept seeing people chanting something while standing in front of stores. Is it a holiday I forgot or something? Gonzal had the day off, so his usual source of what was going on in Cliff's End, roll call at the start of his shift, was denied him today. When he arrived at Milano's, the weaponsmith's shop was closed. He tried knocking on the door. Milano herself, a dark-haired elf, opened the door and said, "Sorry, Gonzal, closed today. Come back tomorrow, okay? Kobarne Gorvangin!" And then she shut the door right in his face. Excuse me. He didn't know those last two words, though they sounded like what the other people were chanting too. What the hell is that about? Shaking his head, Gonzal headed back home. He had the day shift the next morning, so he wouldn't be able to come back tomorrow, as Milano had directed him, until after his shift was over. Hope I don't need the damn dagger. 4. Lieutenant Danthras Tresillian was very much ready to go home. It had been a surprisingly quiet day. The magistrate had called out ill, so the testifying she and her partner, Lieutenant Torian Van Wiveld, were to do in the Radea case was postponed. No new cases came in, amazingly enough, so the pair of them took advantage of this rare opportunity to catch up on overdue paperwork, which would, if nothing else, get Sergeant Jonas off their backs about it. By the time said paperwork was done and filed away, they were alone in the squadron that was located in the eastern wing of the castle. The north wall had a huge picture window with a beautiful view of the forests of Nimvale, while the south wall had the 3 doors that led to the interrogation rooms. Torin and Danthras' desks abutted each other, with the 4 more desks scattered about, but they were unoccupied as the other detectives were all out on cases. Captain Drew was in his office, and Jonas was away at a meeting with Sir and Madam Wint. "Glad we've got that finished, at least," Torin said with a grin as he put his booted feet up on his desk. "It should placate the captain and the sergeant for a time, I would think." "Nothing placates Jonas," Danthras said with a chuckle, "but I'm willing to bet that Drew will be thrilled beyond all possible imagining. In fact..." Danthras trailed off, as she wasn't even sure she should voice her thought, but then Torin prompted her. "In fact, what?" It's less than an hour before we go off shift. I think we should ask Drew if we can go home early. Torin regarded his partner with a look of confusion. Who are you, and what have you done with Danthras? What are you talking about? We've been partners for over a decade, and you've never asked to end your shift early before. Because I knew what Osric would say if I asked him. Torin laughed. No, with extreme prejudice. Exactly. But Drew is different. He was a detective with us for years before he got promoted, and I'm willing to bet he'd be, Excuse me? Danthras turned to see one of the page boys standing in the doorway to the squadron. Yes? It's Lord Duval, Lieutenants. He wants to see Captain Drew and whichever detectives are up next. Danthras sighed. It was never a good thing when the Lord of the Domain wanted to meet. 15 minutes later, Danthras, Torin, and Drew all entered the sitting room in the western wing of the castle. Where the squad room was fairly utilitarian, albeit with that fantastic view of the forest, the sitting room had no windows, but was beautifully appointed with a huge, comfortable-looking easy chair, an expansive couch, a massive fireplace, and several tapestries on the walls. Lord Duval sat in the large chair, while Madame Ilric and Sir Romet sat on the couch. The latter was the nobleman who supervised the castle guard, while Madame Ilric was the noblewoman who oversaw the guilds. Ah, Captain, Lieutenants, welcome. Thank you for coming, Duval said. A crime has been committed. Danthras exchanged a glance with Torin. Drew said, What crime would that be, my lord? The guilds have conspired to cease working. Sorry? Madame Ilric spoke, the elderly woman's voice thin and papery. All of the guilds have decided not to work today. It has ground commerce to a halt. Suddenly, Danthras understood why it had been so quiet today. Thankfully, Romet added, the dock workers, sailors, and fishmongers do not have guilds. It would have been disastrous if all sea trade had ceased for even a day. What is it you wish us to investigate? Danthras asked. Who is responsible? Duval said. This is a violation of the social contract between the guilds and their customers, and between the guilds and the nobility. Danthras suspected that the latter was Duval's bigger concern. Drew asked, okay, but, well, I'm not sure what law that violates. In truth, Romet said, it is not clear that any law has been broken, as there are no laws in the statutes of Cliff's End that forbid such an action. Ilric said, but there are laws related to disturbing the peace, disorderly conduct. Yes, but they're not disorderly at all, Romet said. They're simply standing outside their places of business and chanting something in Dailene. Before Ilric could continue the argument, Duval held up a hand. Precisely what law has been violated is a matter for the magistrate to deal with. I still wish to know who is responsible for this and have them placed under arrest. Again, Danthras exchanged a glance with Torin. And again, Drew was kind enough to speak up, his purple cloak giving him slightly more authority to speak his mind than the earth-colored cloaks the two detectives wore. I'll be happy to have Lieutenants Tressilian and Ben Wivel tackle this first thing in the morning. In a tone that seemed to lower the temperature in the room, Duval said, Excuse me? Well, the shift's over in less than an hour. The last time you and I met with Sir Romet in this same room, you both told me that overtime requests wouldn't be fulfilled until midsummer. And since it's still spring, my detectives are going home soon. They'll tackle this first thing in the... Obviously, Duval said quickly, the lieutenants may work beyond their shift for compensation in this instance. Thank you, my lord, Drew said with a slight bow of his head. I was just trying to follow your instructions. Duval sighed. My father may have enjoyed such semantic games, Captain Drew, but I do not. Please keep that in mind for the next time we meet. Absolutely, my lord. The three of them left the sitting room, and as soon as they were out of earshot of the nobles, Danthras said, Thank you, Captain. Yeah, well, I don't care how many semantic games I gotta play. The two of them went on for like half a damn hour about how there will be no OT no matter what, so I wasn't taking no chances. Of course, most of the guild halls will be closed come sundown, but give it a shot anyhow. There's always people hanging around. Definitely, Danthras said. I believe, Torin said, that we should start with the Prostitutes Guild and the Blacksmiths Guild. Danthras frowned. Why those two in particular? Because both guilds had recent changes in leadership. Kalo Siro retired, and there's a new head of the Blacksmiths Guild, and Suzette was recently appointed the new head of the Prostitutes Guild. At that, Danthras rolled her eyes. Suzette had been an informant of Torrens for years, but Danthos herself had always found her incredibly annoying. Fine, Drew said. Torren, you go to Sandy Brook Way, talk to Suzette. Danthos, you talk to the blacksmiths. With a sigh, Danthos said, I think it might be better if I talk to Suzette. She's my informant, Danthos, Torren said testily. And, Drew added, you don't like her, which means it'll be even worse than your usual snotty self, and it'll piss her off, and she won't tell you anything. Fine, Danthos shook her head. When did you get so observant, Drew? Drew grinned. Watching you all these years. Get going! The sooner we figure all this out, the sooner the three noble shitbrains we just finished talking to will stop crawling up our asses. Thank you ever so much for that mental image, Captain, Torren said dryly. 5. I'm going to run out of fingers to do this for the next time, but... Danthos was not entirely surprised to find that the hall that housed the Blacksmith's Guild was closed down for the night, with nobody present and the front door padlocked. In truth, given the time of day, that was to be expected, particularly after a day filled with not working. Having said that, Danthos wasn't about to turn down the overtime either. As it happened, the Blacksmith's Guild headquarters were only a short walk from the hall that was shared by the Lumber's Guild and the Cooper's Guild, at the corner of Celinda Path. Their front door was unlocked. We're not open to the public, said an older elven woman without preamble as Danthos entered. The woman was hunched over, making her seem shorter than she was, and wore a pin that identified herself as part of the Cooper's Guild. Her awful posture meant she was looking more at the floor than at the lieutenant. Danthos said, good thing I'm not the public, then. The woman craned her neck upward and actually looked at Danthos, noticing her leather armor and earth-colored cloak, and then sighed. Ah, yes. How may I help you, Lieutenant? I need to speak to the head of the guild. Which one? Either. At that, the woman chuckled. Well, you're in luck. They're meeting with the Carpenter's Guild boss in a meeting room. That was, indeed, a bit of luck. I need to speak to all three of them, actually. Nodding, the woman said, if you wait here, I'll see if I can interrupt them for you. The woman moved off to one of the rooms in the back, and Danthos stood in the entryway, waiting, trying to recall if she'd been in this building before. She was sure she had, but she could no longer recall when or why. Well, why was obvious. It would have been for a case. But after more than 11 years on the job, it was hard to remember specific cases, specific times you went somewhere. The woman stuck her head out from the doorway she'd gone through. Come on back, Lieutenant! Danthos followed the woman down a hallway to a very small room with a very big wooden table in the center of it. 3 human men sat around it. A large man with huge arms folded over his barreled chest, wearing a pin that identified him as with the Lumber Guild, sat near a tall, skinny, bearded gentleman with a Cooper's Guild pin, and a short, stocky, bald man with a thick mustache, who wore a Carpenter's Guild pin, sat across from him. What do you want, Cloak? The Carpenter asked. I'm Lieutenant Danthos Tresillian. You are... Embar, the Carpenter said. Tam Quinlan, the Lumber Guild head said. I'm Delheim. What's this about? The Cooper asked. It's about today's little stunt. Just expression on displeasure with the way of things are. Way of things we are. Blech, do that again. Just expressing our displeasure with the way of things. One more time. Just expression. I'm gonna be on this for a minute. Okay. Just expressing our displeasure with the way of things we are, Quinlan said. Danthos frowned. Excuse me? I wasn't aware that there was a problem with the way of things. We went to the castle, all right? Quinlan said. Told his high and mighty lordship that we wanted to unite the guilds. Really? That took Danthos aback. All the guilds under one banner. Exactly, Delheim said. For starters, it would mean we wouldn't have to have meetings like this one. That last was said with a nasty look at Embar. Look, I didn't negotiate that deal. Mirinshell did. And you didn't tell us about it. Danthos held up a hand. Can you please get back to arguing after I leave? I'm more interested in you all stopping work and trying to unite. Whose idea was this exactly? A group effort it was, Quinlan said quickly. Danthos noticed that he seemed to deliberately talk over Embar and Delheim before either could speak. That's right, Embar said slowly. We all wanted it, we all agreed to it, we all did it. Mind telling us what business this is of yours, Cloak? Delheim asked. The castle guard's job is to maintain law and order in the domain. What you did today was possibly against the law, but definitely against the notion of order. That'll do us a favor then, Quinlan said. Tell his lordship that if he wants order in his domain, he should let us unite, yeah? Greetings, my sweet lieutenant, Suzette said when Elshra led Torin through the beaded entryway to the back office she maintained. What may I do for you this evening? She sat at her desk, overstuffed as it was with scrolls and parchments, looking unusually casual. Her thick black hair tied back in a ponytail. She wore a simple blouse and leggings rather than her usual scoop-neck gown, and she wore no makeup. And yet she still was incredibly striking. I cannot help but notice a dearth of customers, Torin said. Indeed, Sandy Brookway was impressively empty as I walked down it, a state of affairs matched by most businesses I passed on my way here. These are all statements, my sweet lieutenant, Suzette said with a coy expression. She never smiled, but her eyes did sometimes light up with amusement. And they none of them answer my question. I also cannot help but notice that you are not dressed in a manner suitable for greeting customers. As you say, there are none today. Torin sighed. There were occasions when Suzette was straightforward, but they were few and far between. And why is that? I seem to recall your business being open every day. Except today. If you wish to know why, you may query Lord Dorval on the subject. I believe you both work in the same building. Very droll, Suzette. But I find it fascinating that so many guilds participated in this action. One rarely sees such cooperation among even 2 or 3 guilds, much less all of them. Oh, that is not the first action the guilds have taken in concert, but the second, and it was due to the first not going as planned. Torin rubbed his chin through his thick red beard as Suzette informed him of the meeting with Lord Dorval. She concluded with, and then we all agreed to cease work for a day, to express our displeasure with Lord Dorval's rather dismissive rejection of our proposal. I do not believe that his lordship received the message you intended to deliver, given that he assigned me and Danthris personally to investigate this work stoppage. Again, Suzette's eyes sparkled. But I do not believe that there is anything to investigate. We committed no crime. Torin had no interest in rehashing the legal discussion that had ensued in the castle sitting room. At present, we merely have been charged with determining the perpetrators of the day's actions. It was a communal decision. If anyone is to be arrested, it should be all of the members of all of the guilds. I'd be happy to volunteer to accompany you back to the castle. She rose from her chair and offered her arms. Holding up both hands, Torin smiled and said, Not quite yet, I'm afraid. But if that changes, I promise, I shall arrest you myself. Suzette bowed her head. Very considerate, my sweet lieutenant. Only one other guild hall was open, that of the Bakers Guild, and that guild head, an elf named Heltha Lothbrogsa, also said that it was a collective action by all the guilds. She also said that they just wanted to unite and were unfairly prevented from doing so by the Lord of the Domain. While the guild hall for gardeners was closed for the night, Danthris knew that the gnome who led that guild, Boys, usually spent his nights at the Stone Kobold. After traversing half of Cliff's End, Danthris needed a drink, so she tried the tavern in question. Sure enough, he was there, sitting at the bar, his short legs dangling from the stool. He gripped a drink in his hands that had been darkened by years of fondling soil, and Danthris' sensitive nose picked up the peaty aroma that hovered over most members of his guild. Boys, Danthris said as she approached the bar. The gnome turned, bushy eyebrows raising high with surprise above his tiny eyes. Lieutenant Tercelian, what brings you here? Not one of a sabotaged garden, I hope. Danthris shook her head. Not this time, no. She had first met Boys when several of the gardens in Unicorn Precinct had been poisoned by an artificially created blight. Boys had been quite useful in tracking down the type of poison as well as the perpetrator. Given how crowded the bar was, and the nervous looks the bar's other patrons were giving her, Danthris glanced around and found an empty table. Let's go talk over there. Sure. Boys hopped down off the stool and reached up to grab his mug. Danthris ordered an ale from the bartender, then joined Boys at the table. So what do you need me for this time? Boys asked. I was wondering about the little protest that went on today with all the guilds deciding not to work. Boys shuddered. Not all the guilds. I wanted no part of Alessandro's plan. Danthris cocked her head to the side. Alessandro, that's the new head of the Blacksmiths Guild, right? Nodding, Boys said. He's got some shit-brained notion of uniting all the guilds, trying to get us all to go along with it. But not you. It's stupid. For Wyatt's sake, we can't even all agree the sky's blue. And who's going to run it, huh? I mean, nobody's talked about it yet, but this is Alessandro's pet project, so you can bet all the silver in your pouch that he'll be wanting to be the one running things. I don't know about you, but I don't want a blacksmith telling me how to run my guild. What's good for my people ain't going to be what's good for his. We mostly deal with witch shitbrains, and they require a certain... Voice hesitated, then let loose with a wide, gap-toothed smile. Finesse! Blacksmiths only work with commoners. They ain't got the sense of it. Or any other kind of sense, truth be known. That ain't how I want to run things. The next morning, Danthos and Torin both arrived at the castle. Danthos a good half hour before Torin, as was typical, and were told that they were to meet with Lord Duval at noon to advise on their progress. The other 4 detectives all left following the morning briefing with Jonas to work their cases. For their part, Torin and Danthos compared notes on their previous night's activity. Torin said, I spoke to Suzette as well as Jessica and Charpak, and they all told the same tale. The guilds wished to unite, Lord Duval told them they couldn't, and so they all agreed to the work stoppage. That sounds very much like what I got from Quinlan, Delheim, Embar, and Lothbrogsa, Danthos said, almost to the point where it seems rehearsed. There was one slight variation, Torin said. Jessica credited Alessandro with the idea for uniting the guilds. Then she quickly added that they were all behind the idea, however. Interesting, because I got a much larger variation from Boyce. After Danthos shared Boyce's version of the story, Torin's eyes went wide. Fascinating. And since Boyce isn't part of this cabal of guilds that wish to unite, it lends a bit more credence to what he says, especially given how lockstep the others were. Shortly after midday, a page boy came to fetch them to Lord Duval's office, rather than his sitting room. His lordship was alone in the office also, which pleased Danthos, as she preferred to deal with as few nobles at a time as was possible. Lieutenants, I am pleased to see that today has been business as usual thus far. This bizarre incident seems to have only lasted the day. What have you in terms of progress? Torin said, It would seem that the work stoppage yesterday was in direct protest to your rejection of the guild's request to unite. What? Duval shook his head. That idiotic notion? I had honestly forgotten that Alessandro had put it to me. What an eccentric response. This was all because I told them that an illegal and unprecedented notion couldn't be implemented? Apparently, Torin said. Duval's lips twitched. Absolutely ridiculous. Have you determined whose idea it was? It was a collective notion by all the guilds, Danthos said. Now, we could arrest the heads of all the guilds that participated in the stoppage, but I suspect that would not improve matters. Quite the opposite, Torin said. Particularly if you're willing to reconsider your position on the guilds uniting, or, at the very least, telling the guilds that you'll reconsider your position. Duval sighed. I suppose I should reconsider it so something like this doesn't happen again. Still, in all, I'm tempted to tell you to arrest all the guild leaders just on principle. But no, you're correct. That will solve little. Indeed, it would have the effect of uniting the guilds even further against me, which is hardly a desirable goal. Very well, lieutenants, thank you. I do not believe it would be wise to make any arrests at this time, and you may consider this matter closed for the time being. Thank you, my lord, Torin said fervently. Danthos just nodded, and they both left the office. As soon as they walked into the squad room, Jonas said, Ah, good, there you are. You still investigating that case for his lordship? No, thankfully, Danthos said. We can go back to working real cases. Good, because we've got a murder. A fellow by the name of Alessandro. He's a blacksmith. I beg your pardon? Torin asked. Danthos just stared at Jonas with her mouth hanging open. Jonas frowned. Do you know the man? In a manner of speaking, Torin said. He was at the center of what we were investigating for Lord Duval. Shaking her head, Danthos added, and apparently we're still investigating. 6. I shudder to think what would happen if the guilds did unite, Danthos said as she and Torin walked down Mirka Way toward the hall used by the Blacksmiths Guild. Oh? I think it's an excellent idea myself. Danthos shot her partner a look as they continued down the thoroughfare. Are you insane? The guilds are the source of half the corruption in this city-state. I don't believe I would go that far, Lieutenant. Yes, some of the guilds are corrupt. They're also great workers. They also grant workers benefits and compensation that they would never have without the guilds. They protect the people who need it. Danthos snorted. I suppose you had guilds in Miverin? No. But we didn't require them. People who performed tasks involving difficult labor or special skills were treated with honor and respect, and very well compensated for their efforts. I never even heard of the concept of menial labor until I joined the army. In Miverin, no labor is menial, or considered lesser than intellectual pursuits. It's revolting that there even is a need for guilds, but given the appalling treatment toward laborers in the human lands, I'm not surprised. The way to improve their lot in life is to work to change the laws, then, Danthos said. To band together like thieves in the night to plot and plan and agitate for change, that's counterproductive. Not the easiest task to accomplish when the nobility make the laws. Perhaps not, Danthers sighed. Perhaps the guilds do some good, but I've caught far too many cases of assault and theft and murder that trace back to shenanigans by guilds to view them as anything but a nuisance. Having passed Oak Way into Dragon Precinct, they soon came upon the guild hall used by the blacksmiths. A guard from Dragon, a recent recruit whose name Danthers could not recall, stood outside the main door. What have we got? Standing straight and at attention, the guard spoke in the formal and stilted manner of a soldier speaking to a general. Dead body, ma'am! From the witnesses we've spoken to have said, it's a guild leader, ma'am, named Alessandro. Danthers sighed. She had been hoping that the report Jonas had gotten was mistaken. But if it really was Alessandro who was dead, and if he really was the one behind the whole Gorvangin nonsense from yesterday, then this was going to get ugly. Torian said, Deslin, have you summoned the ME? The guard, whose name was apparently Deslin, said, Magebird disappeared right before you two arrived, sir. Should be here in half an hour, sir. Let's hope, Danthers said. The magical examiner, a wizard named Benin, only occasionally arrived when he said he would. Stay here. Don't let anyone but Benin in. Yes, ma'am. As they entered, Danthers asked Torin, his name's Deslin? Deslin Cylindri. Used to be in the Royal Guard in Valessa, but he moved here with his family when they bought a boat. That explains the aggressive formality. The Valessa Royal Guard was run more like a military than the Cliff's End Castle Guard. Danthers found herself liking it from Cylindri and was wondering if she could talk to Drew about instituting that level of formality among all the guards. Thinking about the guards they had, not to mention Drew's own casual style, she abandoned that thought almost immediately. They went through the large wooden doors to the guild hall to find a very long hallway. Standing in the middle of that hallway, right in front of a prone human form, was Rick Slaney, another Dragon Precinct guard. Hey there, half-breed, soldier boy, Slaney said to the pair of them. Danthers sighed. She'd served with Slaney when she joined the Castle Guard, and he had yet to grow a brain cell in the intervening decade plus. With a wry smile, Danthers said, Good to see you, idiot. This is Alessandro? Slaney shrugged. It's what the other blacksmith said anyhow. Wouldn't know him from a hole in the wall, but I'm thinking the cause of death is getting his head bashed in. Staring down at the body behind Slaney in the middle of the hallway, Danthers saw a human corpse on its side. Half the face was covered in blood, and there was a pool of same under the head and neck. The reason for the former was the huge wound on the forehead, which definitely looked like the result of a blunt object hitting that head very hard. Next to the body was a piece of wood covered in blood, which was probably the murder weapon. Torin asked, Where are these other blacksmiths you mentioned? Jerking a thumb toward one of the many doorways along the hall, Slaney said, In there! How many? Half-dozen. And they're bitching about being stuck here, too. Danthers stood up. Idiot here is probably right. His head was bashed in. Slaney acted no more bothered by Danthers' nickname for him than she was by his for her. Blacksmith said they found him like that when they opened the guild hall this morning. They were supposed to be having some kind of meeting. All right. I'll take 3 and you take 3, Torian said. Especially after yesterday's stoppage, I suspect that they all have work to get to, so let's get them out of here. Danthers nodded in agreement. Idiot, you stay here with the body until Benin arrives. The 3 blacksmiths Danthers talked to all gave the same basic story. Milano, a dark-haired elf who was one of the premier weaponsmiths in town. I arrived at noon for the meeting Alessandro wanted to have, and I found 4 other blacksmiths standing around the body. It wasn't bleeding anymore, so he had to have been there a while. Look, I got a lot of work to do today, including maintenance on 3 of those crappy Castle Guard issue swords you guys carry around, so can I please get back to my shop? I mean, he probably was just going to tell us more about trying to unite the guilds and asking us for another increase in dues to manage that. That's all he ever talked about. It's kind of annoying, really, and if he was annoyed with it, he probably annoyed a lot of other people, too. Rafe, a burly half-breed of elven and human heritage, just like Danthers, who worked the stables at the caravan terminus just outside the city-state in a clearing in the forest of Nimvale. We get this over with. I got like a dozen horses that need new shoes from caravans that came in this morning. I don't know what's going on. Alessandro called the meeting. I mostly just came to say I couldn't stay because I got like way too much work. But then we found the dead body, and this is like so much worse than the damn meeting would have been. It's not like the nobles were ever going to let him get away with uniting the guilds. They probably like put the hit on themselves. Christoph, the owner of a metal shop in Mermaid Precinct. I'm kind of pissed, honestly, because he said this meeting was important. I mean, he's the one that got us all hot and bothered about uniting the guilds, and now he's dead, and I don't even know if it'll happen now. The rich shitbrains probably had him killed. After they were done and let the blacksmiths go, Benin arrived. Danthos and Torin let him get to work on the peelback spell that would show what happened in the hallway in the recent past. It took half an hour and required no living beings be in the area affected by the spell, so Danthos, Torin, and Slaney all joined Salimbri outside. The latter again stood at attention. Oh, for Wyatt's sake, Salimbri, get that damn pole out of your ass. Leave him alone, Slaney, Danthos said. It's nice to know some of the guards can show respect. Oi! Came a voice from down Mirka Way. Turning, Danthos saw a dwarf in guard armor approaching. Like Slaney and Salimbri, he had the crest of Dragon Precinct emblazoned on the chest of his leather armor. What's happening, Zinnig? The dwarf replied. Sergeant Grit sent me to fetch the 2 lieutenants, he did. Fetch us where? Danthos asked. To the precinct. Some folks want to talk to you, they do. Danthos regarded Torin, who shrugged. You have to wait half an hour for Benin in any case, he said. We might as well see who these folks are. Nodding, Danthos then turned to Salimbri and Slaney. You two stay here and make sure nobody enters until Benin is finished. Salimbri said, Yes, ma'am! At the same time, Slaney said, You need both of us for that? Actually, yes. There's a side entrance to the hall on Blark Path. Go through the hall and make sure that there is no one left inside, then guard that door. Slaney sighed. Fine. Danthos and Torin followed Zinnig to Dragon Precinct, and they entered to find several of the people they interviewed the previous night present. Quinlan, Delheim, Suzette, Embar, Charpak, Jeska, Lothbrogsa, and several others. Is it true? Delheim asked without preamble. Is what true? Danthos asked cagily. Embar rolled his eyes. Please don't play games, Lieutenant. We're not in the mood. Neither am I, Danthos replied. Torin added, You asked if it was true without antecedent, sir. I'm afraid we will require you to be more specific. Quinlan asked, Did those wankers kill Alessandro? Danthos sighed. Alessandro is dead, yes, but we have not yet determined the cause of his death. We heard, Charpak said, that he got his head smashed in. Witheringly, Danthos said, That's wonderful for you. We are not at liberty to discuss an ongoing investigation, Torin said, particularly not with people who may or may not be involved. Stepping forward, Quinlan said, What you accusing us of, old son? Nothing yet. Danthos smiled viciously. Take one step closer and that will change. Delheim put a hand on Quinlan's shoulder. It's not worth it, Quinlan. A word of advice, lieutenants, Embar said. The guilds will not take this assault on one of our own lying down. We are one step closer to United now. Before he died, Alessandro started a common fund with the Cliffs End Bank that is for all of us to use to our benefit. We are not afraid to utilize it. Trust us, it would be best for everyone if you close this case with dispatch. We will go where the evidence leads us, Embar, Danthos said. Wherever that may be. Jessica said, I hope that's true, Lieutenant, but given that you report to the same people who likely had Alessandro killed, we don't know anything yet, Torin said. And to speculate before the evidence has been collected is the height of folly. Let me give you all a word of advice, Danthos said. Torin and I are investigating this case. We neither of us have any history of caving into the rich shitbrains in the other wing of the castle. You might recall that just a few months ago, we brought down the Lord of the Domain himself. Heltha Lothbrogsa's eyes went wide. That was the two of you who arrested Lord Blake? Yes, Danthos said. So let us do our jobs. We will get justice for your fellow guild leader. Best hope you do, Quinlan said, or there'll be hell to pay. 7. Where is this place? Anne half sighed. Jork had been asking that question constantly since they left the docks and throughout the walk up Mirka Way. Just a bit further, Anne half said. I don't see why I needed to come along. Jork was pouting as he said the words, which was, in Anne half's opinion, unseemly for an adult to be doing, especially one as tall, broad-shouldered, and muscled as Jork. Trying and failing to sound patient, Anne half said, Because if the barrels are ready, I'm going to need your help to get them back to the docks. And if they aren't ready, I'll need you to be as intimidating as possible with Elixis when he makes the feeble excuse for why the barrels aren't ready. How do you know he'll make feeble excuses? Call it a guess. No, I mean, how do you know his excuses will be feeble? Jork said. Maybe they'll be really good excuses. They won't be, Anne half sighed. The captain ordered these barrels a month ago. Every other time we've ordered barrels from Elixis, they were ready in less than a month's time. So if they ain't ready, something's gone wrong, and the captain wants us to find out what. Fine, whatever. Anhaf sighed again. He wished the captain had sent Corbin instead of Jork, as Corbin almost never spoke. As soon as they reached Yarrow's path, they turned left, and Anhaf said, "It's right down this way." "What, where those crazy people are?" Glancing ahead, Anhaf saw a large group of people gathered on the path, shouting and screaming and throwing things. "Kobarnag Gorvangin! Kobarnag Gorvangin! Kobarnag Gorvangin!" "What the hell's a Gorvangin?" "No idea, but they're between us and Elixis' place." Anhaf stopped walking, as did Jork, and he wondered what he should do. They really needed those barrels, but was it worth trying to walk through a riot? Then a large piece of metal went flying through the air toward them. Anhaf froze with fear, but then Jork cried, "Look out!" and pushed Anhaf hard. He fell to the ground in shock as the metal object went zipping over his head. All of a sudden, Anhaf was glad he brought Jork along. "Let's get back to the docks," he said as he scrambled to his feet. "What are we going to tell the captain?" Glancing back at the crowd, who were still shouting Kobarnag Gorvangin, he saw that Elixis was among them, shouting and throwing things. "That the barrels ain't ready yet." "Kobarnag Gorvangin!" Erkanzig stared out the window of his jewelry shop, watching as people ran past, shouting one union together over and over again while throwing things. His wife, Belzag, was behind the desk, shouting at him. "Get away from the window, you idiot!" Sighing, Erkanzig did as his wife said. Just as he did, a rock came flying through the window, shattering the glass and narrowly missing Erkanzig's head. "For Zed's sake!" Erkanzig cried out, turning to face the window again. "That almost hit me!" "That does it," Belzag said. "We're closing the store down. No one's going to want to buy jewelry while crazy people are running through the streets." Nodding, Erkanzig locked the door. "What about the window?" "Guess it's time we use that protection spell you bought all those years ago," Belzag said with a sigh. Erkanzig had purchased the spell to keep valuable gems and jewels they sold safe from harm. He refrained from reminding his wife that she had told him repeatedly that it was a waste of money. "Kobarnag Gorvangin!" Lieutenant Horan knocked on the final door of this floor of the inn, and two people opened it, a human and an elf, neither of whom were wearing any clothes. They were utterly unself-conscious in their nudity, a level of comfort Horan himself didn't feel as he tried very hard to figure out where to direct his gaze. "Can I help you?" the human asked. "I'm Lieutenant Horan of the Cliff's End Castle Guard. Are you aware of what happened on the floor below this one?" They exchanged glances. We heard some kind of commotion, but we didn't give it any mind," the human said. "We were," the elf added with a smile, "a bit distracted." "I can imagine," Horan said. "Have you noticed anything missing from your rooms?" Again, they exchanged glances. "Not really," the human said. "But we've also been in the room the whole time," the elf said. Horan coughed. Understood. Well, someone broke into two of the rooms on the floor beneath this, so please be careful." "Really?" The elf's eyes widened. "Do you know who did it?" "Not yet, but we're hoping to learn soon." Horan hesitated. This was the part where he was supposed to look inside the room to see if the stolen merchandise was there, but he really wanted to end this interview as quickly as possible. Back when he was a guard assigned to Mermaid Precinct, he never had to deal with this kind of nonsense. While the higher pay as a lieutenant was nice, and he appreciated that Captain Drew thought enough of him to make him a detective, this endless questioning of people and remembering what to ask and when to ask it was making him crazy. Also, in Mermaid, people generally kept their clothes on. "May I take a quick look inside?" "Of course," the elf said. "We have nothing to hide." Somehow, Horan managed not to respond to that. All he saw in the room was a single rucksack filled with clothes and toiletries. No sign of the missing jewelry. After thanking them for their time, he moved on to the next floor. But when he reached the staircase, he nearly crashed into his partner, Lieutenant Alita Laughlin. "I just finished the top floor," she said. "Nobody saw anything, nobody heard anything, nobody had any of the stolen merchandise. How do you do?" Horan shrugged. "Mostly the same." Nodding, Alita said, "Let's go back downstairs and talk to that innkeeper. What was his name?" "Captain." The innkeeper had been very put out at one of his clients being robbed, and had been nearly hysterical when they first talked to him. "Right, maybe he's calmed down a bit by now." When they got downstairs, Jared, one of the guards assigned to Dragon Precinct, was standing at the bottom of the staircase, which surprised Horan as he'd been assigned to the front door to keep anyone from coming in. There were also a lot of people in the lobby. "What's going on?" Alita asked. "Sorry," Jared said, "but I had to start letting people in on account of the riot." Captain came running toward them. "What is this madness, eh? There are people gathering about in the streets, shouting about cobras and bars." "What?" Jerking a thumb to the door, Jared said, "Bunch of guild folk running down the street yelling, 'Gorvangin Gorvangin.' It's nuts out there is what it is. Figured people would be safer in here." Horan shook his head. "This is crazy." He went to the front door. He heard the phrase Jared had mentioned being shouted as he approached it. Then he opened it to see 3 people running right at him, shouting, "Gorvangin Gorvangin!" And then they barreled right into him, all 3 collapsing to the floor of the entryway. At once, Horan heard a horrible snapping sound, even as pain sliced through his entire right leg. "Horan!" That was Alita's voice, but he could barely hear it over the sound of his own screaming, as well as that of the rioting guildfolk. Moments later, he mercifully blacked out. Madame Asa Ilric was too elderly to really storm into places anymore. When she was younger, she used to push her way forcefully into rooms and chambers and gatherings all the time. Her late husband, Sir Jesril Ilric, may Mitre grant him safe passage to the afterlife, used to chastise her for making scenes all the time, but she didn't care, particularly after the old shitbrain died. However, she did limp purposefully into Lord Duval's office, which was the best she could do these days. "The guilds are rioting," she said without preamble. "What?" Duval asked as he looked up from some scroll he was reading. "Apparently, the guilds believe that we had Alessandro killed." Duval blinked and did a double-take. "Wait, Alessandro is dead?" "Yes, murdered. Those 2 detectives we talked to the other day are investigating it. But the remaining guild leaders have banded together and have organized disturbances throughout the streets of Dragon Precinct. It's quite appalling, and I believe you should do something about it." Blowing out a breath, Duval asked, "What would you have me do? Set the castle guard on them?" "It would be a good start. Surprisingly few people have gotten hurt, but I can't imagine that will last." "I suppose not. I'll send for Captain Drew." "Gorvangin Gorvangin!" The madness continued into the night. "Gorvangin Gorvangin!" Besides both the day and night shifts of Dragon Precinct, guards from Unicorn, Goblin, Mermaid, and Gryphon Precinct were sent into Dragon to try to stop the rioting. "Gorvangin Gorvangin!" All the detectives were sent as well. Danthos and Torin had to cut short their investigation of Alessandro's dying in order to deal with the fallout from his death. "Gorvangin Gorvangin!" The only lieutenants who were not part of it were Horan, currently with a healer, his leg shattered, and Alita, who refused to leave her partner's side. "Gorvangin Gorvangin!" By midnight, the streets were cleared. Many guards were injured. Many more people were hurt. A few were dead. And the property damage was considerable. In the morning, both Torin and Danthos came into the squadron, having not gotten nearly enough sleep. "How is Horan?" Torin asked as soon as he sighted Alita. "The healers managed to mend the worst of the damage to his leg, but he still can't walk. It's unlikely that he'll be able to fully recover use of the leg, and he definitely won't be able to continue as a guard." She turned to Drew, who was coming out of his office. "I'm going to need a new partner." "Yeah, well, don't hold your breath. Right now, the west wing of the castle's all about the guilds." Drew sighed. "You 2 got anything?" "Well, we might have been if we had been able to traverse the city-state safely last night." Danthos folded her arms. "Bunnine's peelback gave us nothing. Whoever killed him used a scaff charm to confuse the spell." "Our next step is to go through Alessandro's home," Torin added. "Our attempt to do so last night was interrupted by our impromptu crowd control assignment. Get your ass down there." "That's our plan." Danthos moved toward the kitchen. "Just need a pastry and we'll be off." 8. Jerry Dunna sat at the table in his private room in Clara's place, enjoying a delicious steak. He had canceled his meetings for the day, what with the guild lunatics running up and down the streets shouting in Dylene, and Jerry figured he was better off just staying in Clara's and eating a good meal. Clara let him use this back room anytime he wanted, assuming there wasn't a paid function there. Given that Jerry had loaned her the money to start the restaurant, mostly because he loved her food, it was the least she could do. Sozin walked in, looking pained. Given that Jerry had asked it not to be disturbed, he could understand why his underling looked so pained, and Jerry intended to give him good reason to feel such if he hadn't interrupted for good reason. I'm sorry, sir, but well, he cleared his throat. There's a couple of cloaks want to talk to you. Jerry sighed. He couldn't really say no to the Cliffsend Castle guard. Fine, let them in. He was worried that it would be that elf detective who used to be in the Shrine Lasef, but to his relief it was Tresillian and Van Wiffled. Well, it's been a few years, Jerry said as the two entered. Would that it had been longer, Tresillian said. Jerry chuckled. I'd have been fine with it being longer as well, Lieutenant. What brings you to my favorite eatery? The death of Alessandro, Van Wiffled said. That's the blacksmith, right? Don't know him. What's he got to do with me? My businesses don't really have much use for blacksmithing. Tresillian laughed. Ha! You owe me a copper, Torrin. Frowning, Jerry asked, Excuse me? Reaching into a pouch on his belt, Van Wiffled pulled out a copper piece and handed it to his partner. Danthurst was convinced that you would deny knowing Alessandro. I gave you more credit for intelligence than that. After all, we wouldn't have come to see you if we didn't already know that Alessandro owed you a considerable amount of money. And given that your businesses, Tresillian said, include money lending, that is a good reason to be involved with the blacksmith or anyone else. Especially one who is as fond of playing dice as Alessandro, Van Wiffled added. We searched his residence, you see, and we found a large number of playing dice, and also several receipts for the loans he took out from you. Jerry winced. He kept receipts? Oh, yes, Tresillian said with a wide, very disturbing smile. He kept detailed records, in fact. You weren't the only person he borrowed money from, but I'd say at least 3/4 of his loans were from you, and it only paid some of them. Since there was little point in denying it now, Jerry sighed and said he finally started working the debt down last week, but all he did was cover about 1/4 of the interest. He still had a long way to go. So you had him killed? Tresillian asked. Of course I didn't have him killed. Jerry rolled his eyes. Didn't we go through this when we first met 8 years ago? Corpses don't pay debts. Maybe, Van Wiffled said, but you might recall that 5 years ago we arrested you because you used a scaff charm to cover your theft, and according to our magical examiner, the person who killed Alessandro used the same scaff charm that you used then. Ah, Jerry sighed. I'm afraid that I didn't want anything to do with that scaff charm since it just got me stuck on the barge for 2 years, so I put it up for sale at Lowry's. Shuddering, Jerry remembered when Van Wiffled and Tresillian had arrested him 5 years previous. He had pulled off a grand theft with Sozin and Gibri, robbing a gem shipment that was coming into the docks. He'd used a scaff charm then to confuse the peelback, but that had actually made it easier for the cloaks to track him down, as the charm had a distinctive eldritch signature that could be traced. Once he'd served his time on the prison barge, he'd put the charm for sale in the magic shop he co-owned. You have proof of this? Van Wiffled asked. With a smile, Jerry said, Alessandro isn't the only one who keeps records. Lowry's is very meticulous with its record-keeping. Like I keep telling you, I'm a respectable businessman now. Who loans money to gamblers? Tresillian said with a glower. Jerry shrugged. Not everyone trusts the banks. We'll need to see those records, Van Wiffled said. Well, the store's closed right now, thanks to those lunatics running around, but if you go by tomorrow, I'm sure you'll find that the charm in question was for sale there. Whoever brought it from Lowry's is likely to be your murderer. 9. It took the better part of 2 days before Lord Duval had been able to see the gathered guild leaders in the same meeting room where Alessandro had tried to convince him to allow the guilds to unite. But here they were, along with Madame Ilric and Torrin and Danthurst. From what Torrin had been told, the only ones who weren't here now, who had attended the prior meeting, were Alessandro, obviously, and also boys, whose guild had declined to join their little collective. Most of the guild leaders were seated around the table in the center of the meeting room, though there wasn't room for all of them, along with the 2 nobles, so Quinlan remained standing, as did Danthurst and Torrin. The rioting had slowed down, but it was still happening, and the healers of the city-state were working overtime on various injuries. Work had suffered, and Torrin had noticed considerable unrest and fear among the citizens of Cliff's End. Thank you all for coming, Lord Duval said. Embar held up a hand. Before we start, my lord, I wish to lodge a complaint. It's convenient that you have 2 lieutenants of the castle guard with you, as they can investigate the Cliff's End Bank. They claim they have no fund for the United Guilds, but Alessandro started that fund with the bank on the day before he died. We wish to know what they have done with our money. Torin allowed himself a small smile, and Quinlan unfolded his arms and moved toward the lieutenant. Something funny, old son? Not entirely. Torin dropped the smile. As it happens, one of the reasons why his lordship asked Lieutenant Tresillian and I to be part of this meeting is because of that fund. Suzette frowned. You know who stole money from us? In a manner of speaking. Danthorst then spoke. The reason why the Cliff's End Bank claims to have no fund for the United Guilds is because Alessandro has not set foot in the Cliff's End Bank in over a year. Charpak's jaw dropped. That's not possible. I'm afraid so, Torin said. According to Amala Grovis, the manager of the bank, Alessandro was lost in the bank a year ago when he was turned down for a loan due to bad credit thanks to gambling debts. Embar started to speak and then cut himself off. Next to him, Jessica said, Gambling debts? Quinlan folded his huge arms again. He didn't gamble. He played dice, Denver said, and was quite bad at it from what we've been able to determine. After being turned down by the bank, he went to Jerry Dunna to borrow the money. Delheim slammed a fist on the table. That shitbrain! He told me he'd stopped! Charpak shot a look at Delheim. You knew? Didn't everyone? Delheim sounded surprised. All the other guild leaders shook their heads. With a sigh, Delheim said, He used to play dice all the time, like the lieutenant said. But he told me he gave it up and he just collected dice for fun, you know? Torin said, His debts to Dunna were growing worse as the interest collected, and he hadn't been able to pay anything. But a few days ago, he put down a portion of his debt, but it barely covered the interest. Suzette's eyes widened. A few days ago? That shit-sucking bastard used our guild fund to pay off his dice debt? Technically, Torin said, his dice debt was paid by Dunna, so he was using your guild fund to pay his loan. Lord Duval finally spoke again. I was tempted to reconsider the notion of allowing the guilds to unite, given the passion you all felt on the subject. However, since the notion was formed under the false pretenses of a blacksmith attempting to pay an illicit debt, and given that your first group action has been to run through the streets like lunatics, I'm afraid that there will be no consideration for the notion now. My lord, Suzette said quietly, the only reason for the running through the streets was because of Alessandro's murder. Yeah, Quinlan said. If you lot hadn't killed him, we wouldn't be having this problem. I can assure you all, Duval said tightly, that no one in the castle had anything to do with his death. Of course, Delheim said. It was Dunna. Now, Danthor shook her head. He himself pointed out the fallacy of that to Lieutenant Van Wivel and I. Corpses don't pay debts. Besides which, Torin added, he didn't use all the guild fund money to pay Dunna. He used some of it to make a purchase from Lowry's magic shop. The guild leaders all looked even more befuddled, to the point that Torin was starting to feel quite sorry for them. Charpak asked, what in Wyatt's name was he buying magic for? A scaff charm, Torin said, the purpose of which is to confuse a peelback spell. And then Alessandro himself then used the charm shortly before he died. Why would he do that? Embar asked. Danthor smirked. To cover up his suicide. The room grew silent. Torin suspected it would not last, but he rather enjoyed it. Unsurprisingly, it was Quinlan who broke it. He unfolded his arms and started gesticulating madly. So let me see if I'm understanding this, all right? That blacksmith got us all together so he could catch coin from us to pay off Dunna for covering his dice-playing debts, yeah? And when that wasn't enough, he did himself in and tried to cover it up so we'd think Dunna did it. Torin and Danthorst exchanged impressed glances, and then the latter said, That would sum up the gist, yes. Bloody shitbrain! Lord Duval rose to his feet. In consideration for your displeasure, and for Alessandro's seeming murder, I was willing to let these Gorvangin Rampages play themselves out. But that ends now. I'm empowering the castle guard to arrest anyone who even shouts the phrase Kobarne Gorvangin, much less accompanies it with riotous behavior. You will curtail the activities of your respective guilds, and rest assured they will remain respective and not united. Furthermore, if these disturbances do continue, I will hold all of you responsible and instruct Captain Drew to have every single one of you arrested for incitement to riot. Am I completely clear on this? Torin tensed. The guild leaders all looked incredibly angry and upset, But their ire wasn't really directed at Lord Duval, but rather at their late unlamented leader. Embar stood also. "We will do as you say, my lord." He reached out a hand. Duval stared at the preferred handshake for a moment, then accepted it. "Thank you, Embar." Then he looked around at the table. "The Carpenters Guild speaks for all of you in this?" They all nodded. "Good. Return to your guilds, then, and make sure that they're aware that this turmoil must stop." With that, Duval stormed out of the meeting room, followed more slowly by Madame Ilric. Heltha Lothbrogsa looked at Danthras. "You said you'd get justice for Alessandro. This doesn't feel like it. Because he doesn't deserve it," Danthras said. "He lied to you all, and stole from you all, then took his own life rather than face the consequences of those actions." With that, Danthras followed Duval out the door. Torrin sighed and said, "Thank you all for your cooperation in this investigation. My apologies for it not having a better end." Then he too departed. I am out of coffee. Anyway, 10. 2 days later, Danthras and Torrin were summoned to Madame Ilric's office in the western wing of the castle. The elderly noblewoman's desk was covered with slates covered in chalk marks, and a large slate stood on a stand behind her, with lists of all the guilds and the various members under them. Danthras didn't even pretend to know what the numbers meant, nor did she need to pretend to care. "Lieutenants, thank you for coming," Ilric said in her weak voice. "Please do sit down." Danthras did so in the tiny chair facing her desk, as did Torrin. She immediately squirmed. These chairs, unlike most of those she had made use of in the castle, was not designed for comfort. "You are probably aware that the madness in the streets has ceased." "Of course," Torrin said. "I understand one of your fellow detectives was injured?" Danthras nodded. "Lieutenant Horan, he's in a healer's care, but there is concern he may never walk properly again." "That is a pity. Please, extend my condolences to his family." "We will." Torrin shifted in the chair, and Danthras was perversely grateful that he was just as uncomfortable as she. "I called you here to express my gratitude to you for your quick work in determining the mendacity of Alessandro. I knew he would be trouble from the moment the blacksmiths elected him to replace Siro, and his subsequent actions, both public and private, proved my instincts to be correct. Our difficulties with the guilds will become a thing of the past, I would think." Danthras was of the considered opinion that the opposite would be the case, but she knew better than to say so in front of Ilric, though she came close to doing so anyhow. Torrin, luckily, was far more diplomatic. "Perhaps so, ma'am, but if that changes, we shall be on the case." "Indeed. In any case, lieutenants, thank you for your excellent work. First again Brightblade's killer, then Lord Blake. Now you've nicely broken the guilds for us. A pair of you are making quite the name for yourselves. Keep it up." With that, Ilric went back to staring at her slates. Danthras exchanged a confused look with Torrin, and then they both got up and left. As they traversed the corridors of the castle to return to the squad room in the eastern wing, Danthras said, "That is not the name I was hoping for." "How's that? Breaking the guilds?" She shuddered. "Hardly something to be proud of." At that, Torrin grinned, and then did a passable imitation of Danthras' voice. "The guilds are the source of half the corruption in this city-state. And it's true, they are." She sighed. "But you were right, they do some good. Besides, I feel bad for them that they were used like that. Their goals are noble ones, to make their lives better, and that was exploited, first by Alessandro and now by Ilric." Shaking his head and looking down, Torrin laughed. "Something amuses you?" Danthras asked archly. They turned a corner, past a hideous tapestry portraying a goblin and a unicorn fighting. During Lord Albin's reign, there'd been a tapestry that was just a unicorn gamboling in the woods there, but his son Blake had taken it down and replaced it with this monstrosity. After his brother's arrest, Duval had left it up, and Danthras had even heard the new lord speak admiringly of it. Torrin answered her question. "I was just about to say that I was starting to see your point about the guild's corruption. After all, their first response upon Alessandro's death was to blame the nobility, and then to start rioting in the streets. Hardly the action of good people out to improve their lot in life. Their actions were those of criminals." Glancing back at the corridor behind them, Danthras said, "So are hers. She's taking advantage of this to keep the nobility's heel on the guild's necks, which will just increase the corruption. Then, as I said to her, we'll have to make sure we're there to arrest them when that happens. I suppose so. Danthra shook her head as they entered the squad room. I just hope our next case is something simple, like a revenge killing or a robbery. Torin took off his cloak and hung it on the pegboard. I must say, when I took this job a decade ago, I never imagined I would consider murder and theft to be simple, or something to be longed for. Probably not. Danthra sighed. That's the job. The end. That story hasn't seen print yet, but it will be, as I said, in more Tales from Dragon Precinct, which will be published sometime in the future by eSpec Books. Meanwhile, you can find me online at DeCandido.net. You can find my blog at DeCandido.wordpress.com. You can get more readings of my stories on this very channel that this reading is a part of. You can find me on Patreon at patreon.com/crad, where I do TV and movie reviews, cat pictures, excerpts from my works in progress, vignettes featuring my original characters, and first looks at my first drafts. Excuse me again. You can read me on Tor.com, where I'm still doing my Enterprise rewatch, and where, starting in June, I'll also be reviewing episodes of the current season of Strange New Worlds, as well as Marvel's Secret Invasion. And other places too. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram. Yes, I'm still on Twitter. And I'm fairly easy to cyberstalk in all those places, so please check me out. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back next month, and take care.